Hello, and welcome to Warhammer 40k's Grim History from the Beyond. I'm Zekthar,
And I'm Yuxin.
and we are the chroniclers of all that was, and all that will be in the 41st millennium. We've seen the rise and fall of many empires. Yet for the next couple of months, we will be discussing the greatest disaster in the history of the Imperium of Man. That's right, folks. The Horus Heresy.
Indeed. Now, this will be interesting, because instead of covering a particular faction, we will be following a timeline. Starting from the Great Crusade, we will end at the Siege of Terra.
That's right. But before we start, if you like our stuff, feel free to follow, like, comment, and subscribe. And if you really like our stuff, feel free to join our membership program. Like Sir Binder Byton, our very first member.
Quite right, brother, and thank you, Sir Binder Bentine. Well, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, today we'll be discussing the Great Crusade.
Neato! So you will be starting with the conquering of the moon?
No. I actually did that in a short box. And if you want to check it out, feel free. It's called The First Battle of the Great Crusade. Actually, today we'll be starting in what took place after that, the alliance with Mars. Now, after conquering the moon, the Emperor's first real obstacle to the reunification of mankind was the existence of the Mechanicum Empire of the tech priests of the cult Mechanicus of Mars, who had historically been fiercely independent of Earth. Instead of outright war, which in my opinion would have been a very bad idea,
Why?
one simple word: Titans.
Ah.
Yes. You got to remember, this was before he had billions of followers. His conquest had only gotten to Mars, and while his Space Marine legions were formidable, the Mechanicum Mars was a well-established and had mighty armies that included boatloads of Titans. So, instead of trying to conquer Mars, he instead opened up peace talks. And so, the Emperor journeyed to Mars in peace with an outstretched hand and made first contact with the people of the Machine Cult in 739.M30 at the summit of Olympus Mons, the greatest mountain on the Red Planet. When the Emperor first emerged from the ancient and refurbished Terran void ship he had crossed to Mars in, surrounded by all the glory and magnificence his psychic abilities could conjure, many of the Mechanicum tech priests present immediately believed him to be the Omnissiah, the mortal incarnation of the machine god, long promised by the cult Mechanicus prophecies. The Emperor eventually earned an audience before the Mechanicum's Parliament of Governing Magi, led by the Fabricator General. The arrival of the Emperor set off political turmoil across the Red Planet. For having expunged any trace of mutation in their own gene stock long before, the Martians were at a loss to explain the glory of the immensely powerful Psyker who strode amongst them. Capitalizing on this, the Emperor spoke of the legendary times long past in the age of technology, when Terra and Mars had worked together to form the core of the illustrious Interstellar Human Federation, and told the Martians that he intended to build a new golden age for mankind in the form of his nascent Imperium of Man. To this end, the Emperor invited the Martians to join him, proposed to them the terms of a generous alliance, backed up by the veiled threat that he would unleash his genetically enhanced transhuman warriors of the Legionis Astartes upon the Red Planet if the Magi refused him. Personally, Yuxin, I think that's kind of a paper tiger. But anyways, the Imperial proposal granted political autonomy to the Mechanicum of Mars and its forge worlds scattered across the galaxy, as well as an exception to the atheistic Imperial truth, so that the cult Mechanicus adherents could continue to practice their faith. The Imperium would provide 6 houses of navigators and its astropaths to the Mechanicum, so that it could unite its far-flung empire of lost forge worlds and continue its sacred quest for knowledge more easily across the galaxy. In exchange, the Mechanicum would supply the Imperium with weapons, void ships, materials, engineers, and technicians required to initiate the Emperor's Great Crusade, to reunite all of human settled galaxy beneath the banner of the Imperium. The Martians, realizing they had much to win by placating the Emperor, and even more to lose if they opposed him, agreed to the terms of the proposed alliance after some bloody internal strife. An agreement aided by the reality that many amongst the Mechanicum already believed him to be the Omnissiah. Unable to abandon their religion which defined their existence, the Martians proposed a compromise that the Emperor agreed to with some reluctance. He would be presented to the masses of the cult Mechanicus as the Omnissiah, the living incarnation of the machine god, the long awaited living repository of all knowledge and wisdom who incarnated all the values of the cult. Despite being a direct contradiction to the imperial truth, the emperor understood that being presented as an avatar of a god was an acceptable evil in order to secure the cult Mechanicus's assistance, and that attempting to force the Mechanicum to accept the imperial truth could wait until the end of the Great Crusade. At the same time, the emperor imposed regulations of his own upon the Mechanicum, well aware of the sad story of the Men of Iron, the false minds who ruled the Martian surface during the early age of strife, and the inherent danger and vulnerability of certain technologies to the corrupting influence of chaos. He forbade the Mechanicum to pursue certain types of knowledge. Foremost amongst those, the development or study of Cilicia Animus, machines that possessed full self-awareness and were totally independent of human control. The Emperor listed a number of machines and technological concepts that could lead to the combination of technology with the sorcery of chaos, and ordered those subjects to be considered taboo, and not to be researched by the tech priests under pain of execution. Since many such forbidden technologies already existed in various Magi's Forge cities, or lay hidden beneath the sands of Mars, the Emperor ordered the ruling fabricator general of the Mechanicum to seal all such devices within the special cache that only he or his trusted representatives could open, known as the Vaults of Moravec. The Mechanicum grudgingly acquiesced to this arrangement, but the restraint on the tech priest's sacred quest for knowledge, even the pursuit of dangerous knowledge, would create festering resentment within the cult Mechanicus that would later emerge during the Horus Heresy, over 200 standard years later. The terms of this political economic alliance were then formalized in a binding agreement called the Treaty of Mars, known as the Treaty of Olympus Mons to the tech priests, after the place on the Red Planet where the Emperor had first trod their soil. This treaty would inextricably bind together the Imperium and the cult Mechanicus for the next 10 standard millennia. To symbolize the alliance created between Terra and Mars that marked the true birth of the new Imperium of Man, the Emperor changed his personal sigil from one of a raptor and lightning bolt, the Raptor Imperialis, to the Aquila, a two-headed eagle whose heads represented the twin foundation of the new human interstellar government, Terra and Mars, Imperium and Mechanicum. Although the Foundation Alliance was later threatened during the Horus Heresy and the Schism of Mars, it ultimately endured across the millennium. With the Mechanicum on his side now, the Emperor was able to start on his next project, building a vast navy to transport his armies across the stars. Now, before you speak of such things, Yuxin, what do you think of this most interesting and important moment in human history?
One of the things that I believe you mentioned, it truly is true, how hypocritical it is that he
What?
goes, we shall follow one religion that there is no religion. And then, lo and behold, wow. I mean,
Now, I think, anyways, for those, anyways, that like for the people of the Imperium, when they look on back on history, anyways, they kind of look at this as like the Emperor was doing this as a necessary evil. If you've heard of that expression before, I'm sure you have, Yuxin. But you see what I mean? It's
yeah,
not like he really wanted to do it. It was just, I have to because we need Mars. I think what's far more interesting, anyways, is the concept that the way that it's portrayed now, anyways, is that he could have taken Mars if he wanted to. I mean, I don't know about you. I honestly don't think he could.
No.
But what do you think?
I don't think he could either. Because there's no way they'd had the forces to face Titans at all.
And remember, anyways, at this point, the Mechanicum of Mars was actually significantly more technologically advanced even than Earth or Terra at that point. I mean, they had been. I mean, there was a point actually in the Unification Wars because they had been blocked off by warp storms. They came back anyways to see how Earth was doing. Well, they called it Earth at the time, old Earth. Now they call it Terra, but they come back and they just see anyways all these techno barbarians just like killing all of each other, and the Mechanicum went, "Oh well, you're doing your own thing. we're gonna go ahead and leave, and don't try following us back. You guys, you be you.
Yeah.
You don't want any part of this. And then they went back to Mars. Also, during the Unification Wars, I don't know if you knew this or not, Euxin, but when they were talking about the Forge, when I was talking about the Forge worlds, during the Unification Wars, Mars was actually sending out fleets of when they had a chance, anyways, to miss warp storms. They were sending fleets out with whole whole Titan legions in these fleets, anyways, and they were just kind of sending them across the universe and hoping that they would start up new worlds. And then one day, anyways, when the warp storms died down, then they could, recongregate, and then
Right.
they would have their own little empire. So I guess real quick, anyways, before you get started with the Imperial Navy, I guess the basic question is that why do you think Mars actually joined up with Terra then? They were actually, honestly, I think, okay, if they did go toe to toe, I think it would have been close, but I honestly think that the Titan, I mean, you've got Titans. I think they would have
Yeah.
just like eventually steamrolled them. But why do you think, anyways, they ended up joining the Emperor? Other than the fact that a lot of them thought that he was the Omnissiah.
I think part of it would have to be they had been so successful sending out people.
Yeah, they had some
A
success.
little bit of you know, maybe we want people back.
So it was actually very ambitious of them just to be like, hey, okay, we'll do this alliance because we want to find our own people again.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's kind of an interesting thought. I personally, I think it was also self-serving. I think it was we want to
Yeah.
expand farther out. We need to get past these warp storms. And if this bozo will help us, kind of thing. Um, Unfortunately for them, anyways, they didn't realize that the Emperor was a significantly better general than they thought. I think because as the Great Crusade continues on, anyways, they actually start to lose a lot more power, and he starts to gain more. But that's a different story, and we'll talk about that actually towards the end, anyways, of what you're going to discuss. But why don't you tell us, anyways, about the Well, okay. Now it's called the Imperial Navy. What was it called before? Actually, well, you'll probably get into that. Why don't you tell us, anyways, about the building of the giant solar naval fleets?
Okay. Now, with the help of the Mechanicum, the Emperor put to work huge task forces to build him massive armadas of war fleets to carry around his soldiers. These were split into two groups: Exertus Imperialis, aka as the Imperial Army, and the warships of the Legiones Astartes, the big, bulking battle barges that ferried the Space Marines around. Now, I must note that while the Legiones Astartes naval corps has remained roughly the same since the time of the Emperor, the Exertus Imperialis has gone through some drastic changes, especially after the Emperor took up his seat on the Golden Throne. During the time of the Great Scouring, it was separated into two formal groups, the Navis Imperialis and the Astra Militarum. Brute Gilman took it upon himself to restructure the Exertus Imperialis into separate entities, one for fighting on the ground, another for zipping around in spaceships.
Indeed, brother. But let's keep to the subject at hand, shall we?
Righto! Under the organization known as Exertus Imperialis, each Imperial cruiser would have a single Imperial Army regiment assigned to it. Imperial Army regimental commanding officers held the command over both the regiment and the warship assigned to them, making a single warship a tactically flexible combined arms unit and minimizing the damage to the Imperium in the event of the loss of a starship, its crew, and its assigned troops in the warp. Now, you must understand the Great Crusade was the largest and most ambitious military endeavor ever undertaken by mankind. As mighty and valiant as the hosts of the Emperor were, this epic undertaking would have been entirely impossible without the countless thousands of warp-capable vessels that transported hundreds of thousands of the superhuman warriors of the Space Marine Legion and many millions of the Imperial Army soldiers from one star's light to the next. The Great Crusade saw a staggering array of vessels constructed, reclaimed, or pressed into service. Some were used for a matter of solar months before being declared obsolete or wearing out and degrading to destruction, quite apart from the losses incurred in battle, while others gained a permanent place in the canon of war, with successful designs endlessly copied and modified as the decades progressed. The first vessels to enter the service of the Imperium were constructed in the orbital foundries of Terra, and later Mars' Ring of Iron, and orbital shipyards of Saturn, under the scrutiny of the Emperor and the forge rights of the Mechanicum. And indeed, it was only in alliance with Mars that the transsolar expansion was possible in any meaningful way. This was further aided when at last the Saturnine Dominion, with its accomplished shipmasters, joined the Imperium after their alien overlords were overthrown. And as the Imperium expanded, many more great shipyards were added. Voss, Grulgarad, Lorne, and Cipramundi all grew to nearly rival Mars itself in void production. Driven by the will of the Emperor, the first expeditionary fleets pushed outwards into the galaxy, foreseeing each expeditionary fleet of hundreds, sometimes thousands of vessels, often ranged smaller contingents of independent flotillas, led by a class of martial leader that would become known as the Rogue Traders Militant. More about Rogue Traders later. As the Imperium expanded, so too did its fleets. Countless long-lost wonders of technology were recovered. Some wrested from the dead hands of unwilling custodians, and others surrendered willingly as fitting tribute to the master of mankind. Some vessels were unique, constructed by methods even the most accomplished adepts of Mars could not hope to replicate. The Terminus Est, the Nicor, the Mirabilis, and the Phalanx, foremost among them. Other patterns and classes proved possible to reproduce and replicate, and before long, the various arms of the Imperium's military acquired their own distinctive panoply of warships. The ships of the Legiones Astartes were often blunt of prow and slab armored, built to endure the withering storm of fire that accompanies a planetary invasion. Their plasma surface hearts powering some of the most destructive weapons known to mankind. But beyond these practical needs, each fleet favored the nature of its legion. From the sable black marauders of the Raven Guard, to the Baroque crimson and golden battlecruisers of the Blood Angels, to the brute functionality and unadored steel of the Iron Warrior's siege barks. The ships of the Emperor's wide naval armadas were more diverse affairs, built for void supremacy. They ranged from stately battleships, multi-kilometer-long engines of doom, their armor concentrated to the fore and their flank repleted with rank upon rank of broadside batteries, to lithe and deadly destroyers and stripped bare warp runners, to watchful picket frigates and lumbering star fortresses. Beyond these were innumerable classes of transports, arcs, conveyors, and supply ships, the forge vessels of the Mechanicum and their own strange space-going engines of war. Needless to say, with all these ships and military might, the Great Crusade went fairly well. But towards the end of it, the Emperor needed to put all the unused ships in places around the Empire. Thus, the anchorage war fleets were constructed. Now, these fleet anchorages, at least one of which was found in each of the Segmentum Majoris, were the largest of their kind outside of the Segmentum Solar, and in their turn were dwarfed by the vast capacity of the Sol system itself, and were founded for their specific purpose of securing the domains of the Great Crusade had forged from the strife-torn galaxy.
So they were basically large space police fleets?
Precisely.
Ah,
As such, their functions were in the main as ports of supply and muster, command and control hubs, and as home bases for a permanently stationed armada of warships with their own armies of auxilia troops. These armadas were designed to serve both as a source of deep range patrols and rapid reaction forces to respond to sudden threats, be they civil disturbances, rebellion, or outside attack, both from within the Imperium and from beyond its border. Now that we have established what the Exertus Imperialis was doing, let's get to the fun part, the rogue traders.
Cool beans, sir. Cool beans.
Now, a rogue trader is a combination of freelance, explorer, conquistador, and merchant.
Whoa. They do all of that?
Well, they can, but they are really known more as privateers.
Ah, yes. The fancy name for a pirate.
Ahem. They're imperial servants given a ship, a crew, a contingent of marines or guardsmen, and a carte blanche to roam the worlds beyond imperial control. You see, the rogue traders got their start as rulers and leaders of Old Terra before the Emperor conquered the world during the Unification Wars.
So all of them were rulers. They were all the technical barbarian rulers.
Okay, so some were just sneaky, probably mafia overlords, and I hate to say it, pirates.
Those guys. We're back to pirates again. I see.
Regardless, these folks were offered a stark choice. Bend the knee before the Emperor and swear service to the Great Crusade, or die by his hand. Though many set pride before what they regarded as slavery, others chose service and took up the Emperor's warrant of trade. There was a price, however. The rogue traders militant were expected to scout ahead of the leading edge of the Great Crusade, accompanied by their own armies, as well as whatever assets had been ceded to them by the Emperor. Probably. You get two gold shillings? Go.
I believe they're called doubloons, Euxon. Doubloons.
Sorry, it's credits, isn't it? It's credits in Warhammer 40k.
Well, unless it's your rogue trader, then it's doubloons, because as we know, they're pirates. Sorry.
No, it'd be gold pieces. No.
Doubloons are gold pieces, you fool. Sorry. Carry on.
Then why do they have to constantly say golden doubloons? Bahaha!
No, okay, fair point. I think they do also come in silver. Sorry. We're talking now about Terran 42. Carry on, Euxon.
The rogue traders militant could expect little or no aid should they encounter foes too powerful for them to overcome. After several solar decades penetrating the inky black of the void, rogue trader militant fleets often appeared as ramshackle vagabonds. Many of their starships taken from defeated enemies, sometimes including Xenos vessels, of entirely novel or esoteric form. They were forbidden to return to Terra, for in his wisdom, the Emperor sought not to just rid himself of powerful rivals, to ensure that even in their deaths, they might serve mankind. Many vanished alone and unheralded, slain, consumed, or enslaved by nameless Xenos abominations far from the light of Terra. Not the Emperor cared. Not as now as the Great Crusade plowed on. The Emperor continued to use this type of role for the leaders and vagabonds that he conquered. Become a rogue trader or fall on your sword. Thus, the ranks were replenished in these strange band of misfits. In their task of exploring, exploiting uncharted regions of the galaxy, rogue traders might come across worlds harboring long-forgotten human civilization, which will be incorporated into the Imperium. Other times they find empty or alien-dominated planets ripe for the colonization or exploitation. All rogue traders are highly exceptional individuals who are driven to success, even though these exceptional people often have extreme character quirks themselves.
Like, I don't know, being pirates, right? Sorry.
Some destroy entire worlds for the slightest reason, or include alien warriors and mutants among their entourage. Some are highly pious, while others are no more than legitimized pirates.
See, you said it so yourself. They're pirates.
Fine, there were bloody pirates. Are you happy now?
Yes. Continue.
One of the most infamous rogue traders was Jean van Jastobel, who became little more than a desperado plundering whatever world he came upon. Even today, rogue traders are often flamboyant individuals, commonly dressed in the most extravagant finery they can acquire. Unlike during the time of the Great Crusade, however, each rogue trader is a unique individual. Unlike during the time of the Great Crusade, however, each rogue trader is a unique individual from particular backgrounds. Some newly created rogue traders come from backgrounds such as the Imperial Guard, the Imperial Navy, the Merchant Fleets, the Administratum, or even the Inquisition, where they will have developed unique outlooks and approaches to situations. Some rogue traders are relatively poor, possessing a single ancient, dilapidated ship. Others are incredibly wealthy and powerful and have whole fleets and entire private armies at their disposal. Certain favored individuals may even call upon detachments of Space Marines, having entered pacts with individual chapters. Some rogue traders operate as mercenaries, renting the service of their ships. Now, legally, the most valuable possession to a rogue trader family is a warrant of trade, an ancient legal document that describes the accepted limits of its operations. These charters are hereditary, thus creating a rogue trader dynasty. These dynasties are granted a personal coat of arms, identifying them amongst the imperial elite. Rogue traders were empowered with the authority to travel freely within the Imperium and beyond. This allows them to interact with cultures for which contact with is normally forbidden, be they non-imperial human worlds or Xenos-controlled planets. Not only that, but rogue traders are granted the permission and freedom to deal with these cultures as they see fit, so long as it is an interest of the Imperium. Upon stepping on a non-imperial world, the rogue trader may claim it for the Imperium just by uttering,
I claim this world for the Emperor of Humanity and his Imperium. I bring justice and truth for the loyal, punishment and death for the guilty.
Today, letters of marque are issued instead of warrants of trade. The letters of marque are rather restricted in some aspects and controlled more effectively by imperial authorities. This may be of geographical nature, for example, restricting the rogue trader into a single sector, or something similar. The more recent letters of marque are not hereditary at all. Hopeful heirs must return and reapply for a new charter. Though a warrant of trade or a letter of marque grants extraordinary freedoms within the Imperium, they also invariably contain particular conditions. Sometimes rogue traders will be required to make regular visits to certain troublesome Imperial worlds, or sent to enact military action on worlds which do not require the force of the Segmentum battle fleets. Often, however, rogue traders will be required to travel outside the established territories of the Imperium in the name of settlement and exploration. Well, before we go on and talk about the Primarchs, what do you think of these flyers, brother?
Well, honestly, I think it's kind of interesting how Rabute Gilliman drastically changed how the Imperial Army worked along with the Imperial Navy. It's how he ended up dividing it up. I mean, when you talk, we've already talked about the Codex Astartes and the whole concept of dividing up all of the Space Marines, but he did the same thing, anyways, with the Imperial Army, which to me I find kind of interesting. Now, obviously, the Emperor, in all of his wisdom and might, anyways, thought that he could control all of it, and he does for a while. I mean, yay.
Well, and then he decides, here's another thing. When doing research, I found out that the power over the fleets was given over to the Primarchs.
Yeah, depending on where they're going. So he did
So
he did
ended
divvy it up
up
a little bit.
ended up causing much worse than if it was, well, foreshadowing.
Right.
Uh,
And okay, and during the Great Crusade, anyways, you brought up actually a pretty good point because one of the things that does drastically change as the Great Crusade continues on, he starts finding his Primarchs. More about that in a couple minutes. But like you said, anyways, he starts to divvy these units up, anyways, for his sons. And then the interesting part, though, is that the Great Crusade, as it continues on, these vast armies of the Imperial Guard and the Imperial Navy, they slowly start thinking of themselves not as the Imperial Navy or the Imperial Army. They think of themselves more along the lines of we're part of the White Scars
yeah,
or the Blood Angels or the Luna Wolves. So it does, yes, as you said, anyways, it's very foreshadowing because it does cause serious problems once the Horus Heresy kind of kicks in. We start to see the breaking down, anyways, of the military in the Great Crusade before it actually kicks off. I mean, that is actually kind of one of the more interesting things about the Great Crusade is that you can kind of see these telltale signs of things, anyways, that should have been taken care of, but weren't. Does that make sense?
yeah.
Now,
I
Iran,
just
go ahead.
I just find it funny how people are just like, well, he can take Mars, and at the same time, he's stated as being wise, keeping people that don't have Titans away. Stay away. Rogue
That's,
traders, go away. I don't want you anywhere near me
oh, okay.
because you may actually do something.
Okay, well, first off, anyways, the whole breaking this massive fleet into different sections for his sons, that kind of makes sense when you stop and think about it. I mean, as a leader, you can't micromanage everything. You do have to
Right,
give control over to other people, right?
right.
And the bigger it gets, the more control you have to give to other people. I mean, now, mind you, anyways, you should control the nucleus, anyways, and those around you, but then they should be giving out, anyways, their wisdom. The problem is that he didn't really spend a whole lot of time with the Primarchs. So they kind of ended up starting to do their own thing. But I will say, though, the funny part is that the one that actually stuck around and is done fairly well are the space pirates that he made. The ones that he gave the most freedom to. They're still around in the
Yeah,
Imperium, which to me is just kind of shocking. It was almost like a throwaway for him. He's just kind of like, yeah, it was a throwaway because he wanted these people out of power. But ironically, anyways, they're still kicking around
yeah. They still have heritage being passed down.
from generation after generation, which to me is fairly interesting. I mean, think about it. It's like all the stuff that he tried to keep really close, all of a sudden just broke apart. Now, mind you, anyways, there were some, rogue traders, anyways, that did actually break apart, but it wasn't all that much of a concern
Yeah,
because he's just like, well, when we see them next, we'll just destroy them, kind of thing. But most of them, anyways, kept that unity, anyways, of just going out and doing what he told them to do because he just gave them very little instructions. He just was like, well, they're kind of a throwaway thing, and they turned out actually to do fairly well for him.
well, it also helps that because of that, they could treat other races however they wanted.
Right. Which actually also makes them, anyways, in later dates, anyways, significantly better diplomats than a lot of the Imperium.
Yeah,
But like I was saying, though, this is interesting to me because this is almost like a 101, anyways, for management. Just kind of like if you want to micromanage everything, you will eventually lose. You won't succeed. You have to give a certain amount of freedom.
it's
And by
kind
the
of
time go ahead.
sorry. One of the things that I think about the histories that we've been recording is some of this has to be though just grandstanding the emperor.
Yeah. But at the same
Was it
time,
like, yes, under his watchful eye, all these ships are being built. At the same time, he's also helping gather all these forces. It's like, no, one requires being on Terra, the other one requires being in space.
yeah, I don't think anybody actually thinks that he personally went from ship to ship to ship. It's like, yep, that looks good. No, no, no. You got to screw that bolt in a little bit better, son. I don't think
Yeah,
anybody really thinks that he was actually doing that. I mean, who knows? He might have actually done that from time to time, anyways. It's like, striding out of there anyways, looking at all of his ships and just like critiquing people, which would have been terrible. But it does sound like the Emperor, a little bit of a micromanager. But I think his biggest problem is that when he did find people that he thought he could trust to be his managers underneath him, he didn't give him any training, or at least the ones that he did give training to anyways, there was very little of it. I mean, the only one I can really think of that he gave a lot of training to was Vulcan, who ironically ended up being probably the most conscientious one out of the bunch. Now, mind you, anyways, some of these Primarchs didn't really need it. I mean, like, for instance, Rabute Gilliman. I mean, he was already creating an empire. It's like, okay, we don't have to give guys much instructions, but you still need to guide the person. I just think
Jagat Khan, he had actually created and overthrown another place. So he already had strategy and stuff run through his head and how to run things, because he had to end up overcoming a massive force with his piddly little army.
Right. But the thing is that it just seems like, and we talked about this last time anyways, I think anyways, the Emperor always thought of the Primarchs as tools, but he never really actually thought of them as people. And if you're going to be a manager, you have to understand how other people work.
Right.
Which means you have to have some sort of, humanity to you, which I think is one of the main reasons why the downfall of the Emperor. I mean, he should have known anyway. I mean, he should have had some sort of conversations with these people so he could figure them out. It shouldn't have been, okay, you do this because this is what I created you to do. There should be an understanding of like, okay, well, what does he think of this?
Right.
But he never does do that. Now, real quick, before we carry on to the Primarchs, do you have anything interesting, anything else you want to say about the space pirates? We kind of glossed over them a little bit, but I think they're fairly cool.
Yeah, so do I.
What do you think of the space pirates? Sorry, privateers.
I would rather be one of them than be one of the Imperium.
Yeah. Massive amount of freedom. You can go anywhere in space.
Like, you want to be stuck with the crap weapons that the Imperium use? The Imperial Guard use, I should say.
The only one I wouldn't want to be stuck on anyways, if I was part of a crew anyways for a rogue militant, would be the ones that came out of the Inquisition. Well, okay. I might be cool with the Xenos ones. The other ones, it would be just kind of like, oh, what are we doing now, sir? Burn the heretic! Oh, okay. Yeah.
Unless, of course, you get one of that person who's just like, I'm just tired of burning people.
That's why they drove me out of the Inquisition.
Money instead. Okay, I'm willing to work with this guy.
Yeah. He's like, that's why they drummed me out of the Inquisition. I got tired of burning people. Cool. I'll work for you. Yeah. But we do have to carry on. Now, what most people remember about the Great Crusade is probably the most important part of the Crusade, the rediscovery of the Primarchs.
Right, you are, Zekthar. But if we are going to cover the original foundings of the Space Marines, wouldn't it be better to wait until those months to go into them? Not only that, but I don't think we have the time to go into too much detail on all 18 of them.
Quite right, brother. But I figured we'd run through them real quick anyways. Yet, some we've already talked about in depth. So we will just tell you fine folks what box they're on. Now, keep in mind, we will be doing this in the order they were found. So, without further ado, here we go. The first Primarch found was Horus Lupercal on the planet of Chthoniya, and leader of the Luna Wolves. Now, while we haven't talked about him specifically yet, we have a whole Vox planned for him in 2 weeks. So, Yuxin, on to Primarch number 2.
Right. The second one is Leman Russ, who's discovered on Fenris. If you want to know more about him, you can check out our Voss, Leman Russ, Primarch of the Space Wolves.
Indeed. Now, the third one found was Ferrus Manus. He was discovered on Medusa, and he was the Primarch of the Iron Hands. Now, what did you think of the Gorgon, Yuxin?
Excellent smithy.
He got along with Vulcan pretty well.
Yeah. And most well known for, and one of the reasons why the chapter is called the Iron Hands is probably because he had like these necrodermis mitts.
Yep. I mean, okay, he did have fingers.
Yeah.
They weren't exactly mitts. That would have been very sad. I can't grip anything. It would have been terrible. Yeah, I've always kind of liked Ferrus Manus. Okay, spoiler alert. In the Horus Heresy, he dies. But what the Iron Hands do after he dies, I've just always been just like so disappointed. And I've always figured Ferrus Manus would be disappointed in them too. But anyways, moving on to actually the next person they found became his best friend, which is Fulgrim. They found him on Chemos, and he was the leader of the Emperor's children. Now, what do you think about this fancy boy, Yuxin?
Very vain. Very vain.
Long, flowing blonde hair.
Must be in place all the time. Everything must be perfect. If not, kill everything.
I said in a lesser extent anyway, yes, he was a very vain individual, but I think in a lesser extent, one of the problems that he had anyways was his pride. Everything had to be perfect. Now, I love the concept anyways that that perfection anyways was his goal, but the understanding anyways that perfection is inattainable. He never quite grasped that concept. So it kind of becomes a problem. Right. The next person that was found is probably one of me and Yuxin's favorites, or Yuxin and I's favorites, which would be Vulcan. He was found on Nocturne, and he was the leader of the Salamanders. And if you want to know more about him, you can check out our Vox, Where's Vulcan? So who's next on our list there, Yuxin?
Next is Rogel Dorn from Inuit. He's the Primarch of the Imperial Fists. In my opinion, his character kind of matches what his chapter is best well known for, which is bastion making, strongholds,
fortresses. Okay, first off, I do have to say anyways, he comes from the worst named planet ever. Inuit? You're just missing a D, and it's an insult. I mean, it sounds like an insult. The planet. Where are you from? Inuit. No, I know you're that, but what planet are you from? That's what it sounds like. Anyways, Rogel Dorn has always been known as this kind of very stern, by-the-book individual. All the way up until you get to the Great Scouring, and then he has some problems with the next guy that's coming up here. But... And yeah, like you said, he's known for building fortresses. That's what he does. He builds the perfect defenses. But who is next on this list? One that we've covered actually fairly often.
Next is Robute Gilliman from Macragge, leader of the Ultramarines. King Smurf.
Yes.
Discovered on the planet of, like I mentioned before, Macragge. If you want to know more about him, check out Rise of the Avenging Sun, Gilliman's Legacy, and the Ultramark campaign.
Now, next up is actually somebody fairly interesting, and we will be talking about him much in the next coming weeks. And that would be Magnus the Red. He was discovered on Prospero, and he was the leader of the Thousand Suns. Magnus is the spooky wizard dude. That's what he does. He's the psyker. By the time of the end of the Great Crusade, he's considered the second greatest psyker in humanity other than the Emperor. The only guy that even comes close to him is Malcador the Sigillite. And I think you'll agree with me, Yuxin. He is the guy that we're going to find out anyways, tries to do everything right, and he does it so badly anyways that it causes disaster wherever he steps his mighty red foot into.
The more that I look into it, it seems like he actually does the same things that the Emperor did. Except, of course, now that he's doing it after the Emperor did it. Didn't turn out so well. That whole do as I say, not as I do thing, apparently.
No, but we must be moving on, and we're moving on to the true pretty boy of the group, which would be Sanguinius. They discovered him on Baal, and he was the leader of the Blood Angels. Now, okay, I gotta state first off anyways, Sanguinius is actually a pretty righteous dude, bro. I mean, he's got some cool wings. He's actually a pretty cool warrior. He loves humanity, but unfortunately, both me and Yuxin don't really like him much. You want to explain that, Yuxin?
There's a couple of reasons. One is because he has way too much publicity, to put it that way. I swear, if anything, in about another few thousand years, it would be Sanguinius saved humanity.
Well, they're already saying that.
The Emperor wasn't there at the time.
Oh, okay, that's
He just
different.
died off in the distance somewhere.
Because remember, they say anyways that it was Sanguinius that put the chink in Horus's armor, and that's why the Emperor ended up winning. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. But to put it bluntly, anyways, I did a poll on who would win in a duel, and it was the Emperor or Sanguinius. And a quarter of the people that responded, and we had about 100 people that responded, a quarter of them said Sanguinius. He is overblown and overproportioned in our humble opinion. And I'm sure we'll get lots of comments in the comments section. But anyways, we do have to move on to actually one of my personal favorites. Yuxin?
We have Lionel Johnson from Caliban, leader of the Dark Angels. Very European looking, Terran 42 European looking and style sort of character.
He's kind of the Brit.
Yeah.
Lionel Johnson is probably, and we have talked about this before anyways, who would win in a duel. He is up there in like the top 3 in both Yuxin and I's humble opinion anyways, for best fighters. Skill-wise. Not who would win, but
skill-wise, then I'd put him in the top 2. Right up there.
Top 2? Okay.
No, actually, the top 3. I don't know where. We'll talk about him later. I don't know where one of the people would be.
Well, okay, so we're just going to go ahead and say this real quick anyways. Our top 3 anyways, and you can put them in any order you really kind of want because they're this close, is Lionel Johnson, Jagatai Khan, and Lehman Russ. I mean, warrior-wise, they're probably the greatest. But, and I'm sure we'll get lots of comments about that too. But we have to move on. Who's next, Yuxin?
Next is Perturabo. He is from Olympia, ironically, and he is the leader of the Iron Warriors.
Now, I've always kind of liked him because he's from Washington. I mean, sorry, it's a dad joke. I've always kind of liked Perturabo just simply because he's always just so underappreciated. Now, the thing I don't like about him, though, is that he knows he's underappreciated, so he kind of whines about it all the time instead of doing something about it. But the more I've looked into him anyways, the more that you look at him and you're like, yeah, he really is actually he's a tactical genius.
Well,
he should have been treated better.
He's the siege breaker.
Yeah.
That's
once you get into that,
he was siege breaker.
Yeah. So when Rogel Dorn was building fortresses anyways, he would build this great fortress and Perturabo would take a look at it and go, okay, and now I know how to break that. That's what he was used for, siege warfare. Now, mind you, he also tried his whole bit anyways for building fortresses because he thought he was good at it. And unfortunately, his older brother, Rogel Dorn, would show up anyways and goes, you missed a spot. And it just drove him nuts.
Right.
But anyways, on to our next guy anyways, Mortarion. He was found on Barbaros, and he was the leader of the Death Guard. Now, the only thing there's a lot of things we could say anyways about Mortarion, but honestly, to boil it down, 2 things. One, he grew up, in my opinion, other than maybe one other person, the worst planet ever. I mean, the whole place anyways, it's just like if you live past 10, you're an old man. It's just not a cool place. It's not a good place. And secondly, the thing he hated more than anything else was the warp and psychers. And we will get into that actually next week. But you got anything else to add about this guy, Yuxin?
Well, you can basically chop up almost his entire, no pun intended, by the weapon they wields, which is a scythe. That's how bad it was there. And kind of what his character's like.
All right.
But
Why don't you tell us?
let's move on to the probably the least favorite, at
I
least
thought he was
amongst
your
us.
favorite, Yuxin. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Go ahead.
And it is Lorgar from Kolkis, leader of the Word Bearers, the one
He's
who
the reason.
talks a lot.
Yep. He's the reason this whole heresy thing gets started. Honestly. I mean, okay, you could build the argument in any ways like Yuxin did last week. The whole thing got started because of the Emperor. But the guy who really started moving things along was Lorgar. Lorgar was a priest. I mean, that's straight up, anyways, what he was. If you want to know more about him, by the way, I go in a lot more detail on him in the Imperial cult because he is actually kind of, ironically, the forefather of the Imperial cult. Yes, the guy who started the whole Horus heresy is the guy who also started the Imperial cult. But
The
now we
religion
will,
that supposedly has kept the Imperium all together.
right, that one.
Ironically.
No, we do have to get into the next guy, which is, I think, actually, Yuxin, your favorite, right?
Yeah,
Or
probably.
he's, at the very least, anyways, one of your top 2 or 3. And that
Yeah,
would be Jagatai Khan. He was found on Chagoras, and he was the leader of the White Scars.
yeah.
Now, he is a Mongol. That's the best way to describe him. From Terran 42, that's the best way to describe him. He's a Mongol. He
Right.
loves moving fast. He loves shooting things. I mean, that's his whole tactics and strategy. Although, Yuxin, once you get into one of the other things that's weird about him is that he doesn't act like a child like the rest of these guys do.
Yeah. Well, one of the things is that his perspective, well, for one thing, like you said, he acts a lot more mature than most of them. It kind of be like, okay, you have Vulcan, he's the grandfather. He's, then you have probably Jagai Khan and maybe Rabute Gilliman. They'd be about adults, and then you have everybody else.
Oh, yeah. I was gonna say, maybe Lionel Johnson is in there somewhere in between kid and adult. I think
He's teen.
He's the problem with him was that he was so secretive. Nobody really knew what to do with him.
The same can be said for the Khan too.
Yeah.
The thing about the Khan was he was mature. He didn't speak out a lot, and he just watched.
Mm-hmm. Well, he was so much on the wild side, anyways. That and what I mean by wild side was just kind of on the fringe. Not that he was crazy like Lehman Russ was, and Lehman Russ really wasn't that crazy, but he was significantly more extravagant. Is the fact, anyways, that during the Horus Heresy, when it gets started, and Horus is trying to figure out, anyways, what he's going to do with all of his brothers, who's going to join him, who's going to definitely not. Jagatai Khan was always, anyways, in the background that he didn't know what to do with him.
Because nobody knew which way he would lean.
Exactly.
We'll get more into what are we talking about? After the Horus Heresy?
After the Horus Heresy, we are going to the White Scars.
Yeah. So,
but one of the things that I need, and Yuxin, you bring this up all the time, anyways, that is very imperative to Jagatai Khan's character, is that one of the things that he never breaks is his word. So if he gives his word on something, he will follow it until he dies, which is something
the other person breaks it. And then he's like, okay, all bets are off. Like, for example,
you hold up your end of the deal, I'll hold up mine.
Yeah. If you break it, then I'm coming for you.
Right. Which we will get into anyways when we talk about Horus. But the next guy, to me anyways, is actually fairly interesting. And he's not talked about much because, quite frankly, everybody hates him.
He's insane. That's why.
That too. And that would be Conrad Kurz. And he was found on Nostromo. And he is the leader of the Night Lords.
All murderers, chemheads, thieves, criminals of all sorts.
Started. And then they put a bunch of gene seeds in them, and then they got significantly worse.
Yes.
Yeah, Conrad Kurz is okay. Well, first off, out of all of these different Primarchs, anyways, they were at least raised by someone. Not always anyways a good person, but they were always raised by someone other than Conrad Kurz. He crashed land on Nostromo, and then no one raised him. He just kind of grew up like a wild animal, which kind of affects your psyche a little bit.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and not only that, but to top it all off, one of the things that the Emperor decided to give him, anyways, as part of his aura, is that he is prophetic, but only in the worst ways possible. So every time he sees something, he has these visions, and every time he sees visions, anyways, it is like the worst thing that could possibly happen. That's what he sees.
Yeah.
So, like you said, Yuxin, of course he's insane. And the sad part about it is that, did the Emperor help him? No. He gave him a legion instead and said, go to work.
Like he did with all the others, except for a couple.
Except for Vulcan is one of them, and then, well, I think Vulcan. I can't think of any others, really. But anyways, moving on. We've only got like 3 left anyways. Moving on to the next guy anyways. You can go ahead and talk about him. But he's probably the guy that has the most righteous beef anyways with the Emperor. He's probably the most right anyways against hating the Emperor. And that would be?
That would be Angron, the Angry One.
Mm-hmm.
Found on Nuceria and leader of the World Eaters, which perfectly fits their name and their Primarch. He is mad all the time. It doesn't help the fact that he has nails in his skull.
Butcher's nails, yes.
Yeah.
And his story, his upbringing, his start anyways, it's very sad how it ends. I mean, it starts like crap, right? And then he strives to do better, and he gets better, and he starts this rebellion. He starts as a slave, and he starts this rebellion, and then the Emperor shows up, and then the Emperor literally bombs the whole planet and kills all of his friends. That's the end of his story.
Yeah.
his upbringing. And then the Emperor is like, well, you can now have new friends with your new legion. Now off you go. What? We will talk about the World Eaters, and Angron is a very interesting character. I mean, when most people talk about Angron, it's just like you just said anyways. He's angry. That's normally anyways the only concept that anybody really thinks about him. He's angry, he's bloodthirsty. He just loves killing things. And there's a reason
true, but
which is all true. But there's a reason why he is what he is. And
right.
And like I said, we will get into that later, but we do have to press on. The second to last guy found was Corax. And he was found on Deliverance, and he was the leader of the Raven Guard. Now, Yuxin, what can you tell us about Corax?
Pale, drawn. He would be he looks kind of like he was the Nemo kid in the back. Actually.
Probably a fan of Edgar Allan Poe. Yeah, I mean, all that is true, but go ahead.
He does have, though, a noble background with the fact that he went as far as to try to free slaves that were on his planet of Deliverance.
He also has kind of a unique perspective, anyways, on war. It's completely different than anybody else. The Raven Guard are the commandos of the Space Marines, right?
Right.
I mean, that's kind of the way he built them, because he's got a tactical look anyways on things that are completely different. In fact, when he was playing war games with Rabute Gilman, ironically, instead of the Emperor talking to him, it was Rabute Gilman that kind of took him under his wing for a bit. And they're playing these tactical war games, and he actually ended up beating Rabute Gilman, of all people, twice at the very beginning, until Rabute figured out what he was doing, and then he never beat him again. But just the concept of using surgical tactical strikes, that's what the Raven Guard are for. And he does it very well. But that does lead us on anyways to the final one. And that would be Yuxin.
That would be, we have the twins, Alpharius and Omegon, who were discovered somewhere in the galaxy.
Yep.
Some
Who
would
knows?
even argue that Alfarius was the first Primarch found. But if you want to know more about them, check out Alfarius and Omegon, the twin Primarchs.
We honestly, Yuxin, we could do a whole other Vox about Alfarius and Omegon if we really wanted to. But
We could spend a
unfortunately,
year on Alpha Legion.
yep, and we've
Just
still
pondering it and still scratching the surface.
But unfortunately, folks, that'd be it for this week. Join us next week as we discuss probably one of the more important moments in history that leads to the Horus Heresy, the Council of Nicaea.
Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this Vox. Feel free to like, follow, subscribe, and comment. And don't forget to check out the shop. We got some cool stuff there, like clothes, pillows, and hats.
No, and don't forget rabbits, Yuxin.
Right, and don't forget the rabbits.
Have a great day. And as always, until next time, this is Ekthal,
And Yuxin.
signing off.